Hey, everybody, and welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me, as always, my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with a DBS Film. On this episode, we're going to take a look at something that we get asked a ton when it comes to just the indie film community, and I think is honestly one of the biggest things on an indie filmmaker's mind, which is how do you successfully start an indie film production? And full disclaimer right now, this is still something we're working towards. It's not full time for us. But with that being said, what we're looking at doing is, we're considering what we're doing right now a success based on the fact that we're hitting the achievements that we're looking at and we're moving forward in the sense of scaling up as a production company. So, what we wanted to basically look at is where we're at now. What would we recommend to someone starting off for the first time in the sense of getting scaled up? Because really, as much as people think it's going to be an overnight process, you're going to make one movie and then you're done. It really is a stepping stone. And we're going to basically break down what we've learned from making now 10 movies with The Haunting of the Murder House ready to go and Shapeshifter film, what we learned in general and anything that we think could be helpful for someone starting out. So before we do that, be sure to take a look at our Discord online. That is the place to be. We make movies for our fans, with our fans. That means we actually do direct casting. We do a lot of other roles as well too. Plus, it's a super fun place to hang out. So, Brendan, as I was kind of mentioning in the intro, we're saying how to start a successful indie film production. I think the first thing, to really kind of understand is what is success. I think we've been pretty clear if you listen to the podcast and the videos before. To us, success is really looking at breaking even, being able to make another movie and making that movie better. But do you want to talk real quick on what your vision of success for DBS is? And then we can talk about what is success in general.
Yeah, I think what you said is kind of how I view success, as in, we get these things out, we get our money back, and we take that money and we make another movie. And as long as you can kind of keep the flywheel going, I think you have a successful movie company. I think it's something to be proud of. It's definitely, as long as I'm continually to make a movie, and not stop, I consider that a success. We're continually in business, because the growth in the beginning part of this process, as you become a filmmaker, as you first start out, is just going to, accelerate so quickly. So you have the growth from one movie to the next. You're going to learn so much. You're going to, meet new people. You're going to have new connections. Just, seeing what we were able to accomplish, going to distribution side with the Girl in Cabin 13 to the one we have now, which is the Murder House. I know the process. I've learned the process. We have more connections. We have a better product to pitch. It's just pretty much night and day. And I think a lot of filmmakers, they'll make one or two movies and then they'll get stuck. They'll run out of capital, or they won't have the ability to make another movie. And I think you've really, in order to do this, to get really good at this process, you have to give yourself as many chances to succeed as possible. Give yourself as many chances to learn as possible. And then, you're basically writing lottery tickets. You never know. All it takes is one person to see this movie, one agent, one manager, one person who's high up in a distribution company to really, have your career take off. And when you're only making one or two movies, obviously you only have one or two shots. So I think your goal and my goal with this whole thing is to just make a movie, get as much revenue back as possible, and take all that revenue and put it into another movie so we can get better and we just have more opportunities.
Yep. And I completely agree with that. And, I think one of the lines that people draw is if you can be a full-time filmmaker, if this can be the sustaining career for you, if you can get enough money back that you can basically live off of this, because right now this is something that we do kind of in supporting the supported by the other businesses that we're working with. But, I think what people don't really understand is that it is kind of a growth period where you really do need to scale into that, especially if you're learning something new. So you kind of almost want to real quick, because here's what I think the best thing would be is, get it out of your mind that this is going to be easy for you to recoup your money with. It's an incredibly hard process. It's an incredibly long cycle of recouping money. And I think one thing that we really want to hone on first is something we see in the indie film industry a lot is people are very disappointed once they finally end up with their movies returns because of how high their budgets are and how little you get back. And again, that's just from our experience within this industry now of, how it can be really tough to recoup your costs. So do you want to talk about how I think the vast majority of people who become filmmakers just had the wrong concept of what success is actually going to look like when it comes to getting started here?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they want to make a movie and they want it to just, explode and blow up and make $100 million. And the amount of movies that are made for less than $1 million that, make over $100 million. Number one, they're all made from Hollywood. There's very few indie movies that actually do this. And second, they're pretty much all Blumhouse movies. And when you're doing that on that model, that's a theatrical model. And that's pretty much the only way you can get to those revenue numbers is through the theatrical release. And post COVID, I don't know if that's even possible anymore, except for like large blockbuster movies. Do I think it'll come back? Yeah, but I think still it's going to be, a recovery time. A lot of these streaming services are just like, instead of doing, theatrical releases, they'll just put it on the streaming platform and get money that way. The problem is that these streaming services are so consolidated that, it's difficult for the indie person to, make money off these platforms. Like we make most of our money off of AVOD platforms, which is great. But for like a Netflix or Hulu or Shudder, if they think that they can make money on it, they're going to give you a flat licensing deal. So you're not going to you're kind of capped on how much money you can actually make. So with a theatrical release, you can make unlimited amount of money. With AVOD, with some platforms, if you have the ability to push it, you can make unlimited amount of money. But I mean, these people are smart. TV smart. All these other companies are smart. If they think that they can offer you a deal that you will take and keep all the AVOD revenue, they're going to do that. So it's going to be difficult for you to, just have a crazy success. Where I think, what my mindset is now is just try and maximize it. Give the movie the best odds of success, which is what we do through split testing. And how we write the movies, how we make sure they're fast paced and they're fun movies. And then, try and just get better with each one. And then, maybe down the line, we'll finally get a connection or we'll get good enough to, get on some of these bigger services, bigger platforms. But I mean, I think gone are the days where you're just going to make millions of dollars off your $50,000 movie. I just don't think it's possible. And I think you're going to set yourself up for failure. If that's your mindset, you're just going to set yourself up for disappointment. And it's a very dangerous mindset to have, because when you do that, you're going to, when you go to the distribution companies and they're like, hey, we're going to put a $50,000 marketing fee in your contract, and you're like, oh, that's not a problem, the movie will make 300K. That is not a good mindset to be in at all. So I think you're going to hinder yourself in the negotiation table, and you're just going to be, you're going to set yourself up for disappointment if you think this is like a get rich quick thing with your first movie. Is it possible? Yes, but I'd rather look at it from the mindset of, hey, we learned, we got better, we have the ability to make another movie. And, we just move forward with that.
Yeah, it really is something where we're understanding the stepping stone process here. I really just think with the amount of content now, because it is incredibly easy to create a movie in the sense of getting the equipment that you need compared to just the past, decades. I don't think you're ever going to see movies like, El Mariachi or the Blair Witch Project or those things again, because back in those days, there was a limited amount of content. And now there's so much content that you're competing with. The only ones that are going to make it to the tops are ones that are completely structured by Hollywood to get there. In the case of just all those movies that are kind of like those smash hits, the system was a lot more narrow, and now it's just really broad, which has its benefits, which in the sense of it's not, it's never been easier to make a movie, but it's never been harder to get that movie seen. So I think really understanding success is something that's critical. Just to kind of end on that and really provide something, directly to someone out there who's listening, I think the best test of success would be making a movie and breaking even on it. I think that is a huge milestone. I think just making a movie is successful if you understand that you're going to lose on the budget and you're okay with that, if you understand it is a learning experience. So what measurements and metrics of success would you give to an indie filmmaker who's like, I want to start doing this?
Well, the other thing you have to keep in mind is that unlike other products, with a movie, when you do release it, especially on the AVOD platforms, it'll earn money for a long, long time. So you don't need to break even right away. I think most, just speaking with the distribution companies, in 7 years is where they want you to kind of recoup your cash. Most of the deals are for 7 years, 8 years. So these things have a long lifespan because you can go from Tubi, you can go to Amazon Freevee, you can go to IMDb TV, you can go through all these platforms and new platforms pop up. Like there's a lot of people who, made money in the heyday of Amazon Prime. That went away. Then Tubi popped up and replaced it. So, the movies that did well on Amazon Prime were, the revenue was going down, now had a second life with Tubi. And it's kind of like this all the way through the sales cycle. So it's like you don't need to make your money back in a year or 2 years. You just look at it as a 7-year time frame. And these things do, they generate, as long as you keep them on platforms and keep, them moving around platforms, you have a good shot of getting your money back. I just think a lot of people want to get their money back like right away, which again is like a theater release. You release it on Friday, you make all your money, everyone gets paid and everyone's happy. So I think it's a longer term play right now. But I think, what I look for is to try and get as much visibility for the film as possible, whether that's festival circuits, whether that's just putting on AVOD, whether that's putting on platforms that are easy for our fans to access. So we're not on HBO or any of the bigger stuff. Would I like to go on that stuff? Yes. But I think you would limit visibility. And I think there are some platforms where you have to make a decision whether you want to limit that visibility or you want to get it in the hands of your fans. And I think a community and having fans is much more valuable than a lot of people give it credit for. And I would much rather get visibility, get eyeballs, even if that's putting our stuff up on YouTube. At some point, that would be, just to get people to watch it would be super beneficial, because once again, it goes back to getting feedback. It's from, finding the people who really like your movies, and then, getting their critical feedback on it is just super valuable. And I think a lot of indie filmmakers suffer from just not getting enough feedback. And when you don't get enough feedback, then you can't identify the mistakes. And when you can't identify the mistakes, you're going to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And you're going to slow your process of essentially getting better at filmmaking.
Yeah, I mean, I do completely agree. I think it is a longer outlook that you need to have when it comes to any kind of recuperation. And with that being said, understanding, getting the feedback and progressing. But I think too many people think the hard part is making the film, which it is the hard part, but they think that it ends as soon as the film's done. They think it's gonna get pushed off and it'll be something that's a huge success. So again, as a filmmaker, I think you really just want to look at having a finished product, understanding that you might not recoup some of it, because again, we're talking if you do get to a distributor, and there's a ton of movies out there that never get to that point. There's a ton of things that just go to the festivals. There's a ton of different levels there. So it really kind of depends on where you're at in the journey of it. But I think step one, make a movie and get it completed, get as many eyeballs as you possibly can on it. And then from there, you can further on and get to the point where you can get some type of, distribution platform to it. So next I wanted to really talk about, one thing that comes up is, what are your skills? I think are really important for the indie film production. And I think one of the biggest issues in Hollywood that sets up film production teams for kind of issues, or just filmmakers in general, they think this production process is super departmentalized, which in Hollywood it is. You have writers, you have the filmmakers, you have a director, you have a DP, you have a sound guy, you have editors, you have all of these different positions. They're very specialized. And in my opinion, I think as a filmmaker, the best thing you can do to give yourself the most success is do everything. I think you have to do everything. I think doing everything has never been easier with all of the technology out there and all of the information. But I think one of the biggest issues that we see when it comes to indie film production is their budgets instantly explode because of the amount of people they have. And as we've mentioned in the past podcasts, having more people does not mean the production is going to be better. Typically, it makes the production worse because you have a lot more things that can go wrong. And you also have people who, if everyone's learning on set, that's not a very good environment to be in. And you just really, if you don't understand what's going into it, you can never be a judge of if it's good or bad. So, do you want to kind of talk about that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to explode your budget is just have a lot of people on your production, because you're just going to have a lot of hours that you're going to have to pay, especially to like an editor or the DP, or just having multiple writers. And you're looking at, when you're shooting a movie, you're looking at your day rate, and the more people you have on there, your days are just going to get more and more expensive. So I think obviously cost and keeping your budget as low as possible for an indie film is one of the main reasons why you should look at trying to do as much and maximizing as much of the film by using your talents as possible. Yeah, and the second thing is that you'll become a much better filmmaker if you understand the process from beginning to end. So instead of actually, having writers on staff and just being like, all right, guys, write this script, or, finding a script that you really like, you are heavily involved in the writing process. I think that that's something you need to do, because you can make these changes. If you know how to edit, you can write a script that's easy to edit. If you know how to shoot, you can write a script that's easy to shoot. So I think a lot of problems that indie films run into is they kind of do the opposite thing. They have this grand vision, this grand script that they either write themselves, or that they find that someone wrote, not understanding or putting a budget on paper. So going into it, they're already in a position to fail, just because it's such a difficult script to actually shoot. And then the same thing, like if you're an editor and you see this script and it's a whole bunch of CGI, or there's kind of crazy shots and they're very technical stuff, it's going to be difficult to edit that movie. And I've seen the most success with our stuff is when I've really went and write this stuff myself now. And when I go and I shoot the stuff now, and when I go and edit it all myself, because when I'm involved in all three phases already, I'm writing a scene, and in my head, I'm like, all right, this is how I'm going to shoot it. And then in my head, like later on, I'm like, all right, when I'm actually shooting the scene, I'm like, all right, this is how I'm going to edit this scene. So I kind of have a good idea of, what and how I'm trying to do this. And I know myself better than anyone else. And so I know my limitations. I know what I'm good at, and what I can't pull off. So anything that I'm, get anxious about or feel like I can't do or we can't do, I just cut it. I don't even try and risk it anymore. And it hurt a lot of our movies in the first 8, where we're just doing things that we didn't have a technical level of understanding of how to do them. So, that's just difficult. And then, the last thing is that you always need to be the one driving your movie forward. You are the only person in charge of getting this movie completed and finished and uploaded. And if you're having to wait on other people, if you're having to, fire someone and then hire a whole nother production team or editor, or, other people to help you out to get this thing done, it's going to take time. It's going to take money. It's going to slow you down. I'm the only person in charge of writing these scripts. I'm the only person in charge of the deadlines and, when we make day, when we're shooting, and I'm the one who, edits this whole thing and gets it uploaded. So I am the driving force. And if we're delayed, if we're slowed down, it's only my fault. I'm the only person to blame. So I think if you have that mindset as an indie film, or at least try and consolidate as much as possible, and really only have the people that are really going to help you, the people that you trust working on these projects, I think you're going to have a much better chance of success.
Yeah, I mean, it really does come down to, if you're not able to provide the Hollywood budget when it comes to the compensation that they're used to on these different sets and things like that, realistically, it's going to be really tough for someone to really justify having the same passion or hard work that you have. It's just going to run up the hours. And I think it's really the best thing you can do is force yourself to learn every single position, because either you can learn it and end up doing it, or you can figure out what you need to outsource, but immediately you understand the process. So I think using the first movies that you make, you really want to look at doing everything yourself in the sense of as much as you possibly can, even if it's strictly a learning environment. Even if you're bringing someone on to help you, make it clear that, hey, I want to be the one doing this too. Maybe you can assist here. There's just so much stuff online now. I mean, anything you can think of on a film set is done. There's probably a course about it. There's probably multiple things. There's probably paid things. There's probably free things on there. I would say that the information that is available for filmmakers has never been higher, and the systems out there have never been easier to use. So you have to embrace that. And if you're not embracing that, and you're not already saying, okay, let me look at doing everything, I think you already have a mentality that's going to be in for a pretty rude awakening, in the sense that it's just going to be difficult for you to be able to compete. I mean, that's the hardest part. You got to compete for these eyeballs. You compete with these multi-million-dollar features. And the way that we can do it on the indie level, that we do it so successfully, is by, doing all of these things. And to kind of highlight, right now, I feel like the biggest asset that we have now is our learned skills. I would say, if you ask me, what is the biggest, benefit that we have as DBS with all the movies that we made, is the skills that we have now to make a movie, and then the community that we've built from it. And both of those things really just came from making movies. So do you want to kind of talk about how, as an indie production and indie filmmaker, the hard, tangible skills that you're going to gain from making a film are going to be the best things, because you can take these skills with you? You're not going to lose these skills. You're going to have the ability to produce movies. And if you can focus it almost that you're trying to just get that process, then, what skills do you need to make that process effective? That's the best thing that you can have as an indie filmmaker.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. I think it's learning how to do this stuff, it's understanding how to do this stuff, and just sharpening your skills. But I think just having these skills is a big deal for an indie filmmaker. But also knowing like what's possible and what's not possible is a big thing. Because I remember when we first started out, I wanted all these crazy scenes, I wanted a whole bunch of crazy gore, I wanted these crazy technical shots. And when you have a production with people who also don't have a lot of experience, they're like, yeah, man, I could totally do that. We could totally do this. We could do these squib shots. We could do this gore. We could do these scenes. And then, because nobody's really going to tell you no. And I think a lot of the people when we first started out just didn't have a lot of experience like we did. So they also thought that they could pull some of this stuff off. So I think that that's a big time problem, is you're watching all these Hollywood movies and you don't realize the complexity and difficulty of some of these shots, how many people work on just specific shots, and how crazy some of this stuff really can be. So I think understanding your limitations is just huge, because then you could communicate that to other people and you could be like, hey, like, this is what I'm trying to go for. Listen, I know we can't do X, Y, and Z, but I think I have a creative way to essentially do this. Let's try it this way. So instead of them saying, oh man, I don't know if you can actually do this, you understand that, you communicate it, and then you guys work together to come up with a compromise. Because I think a budget does actually make you a little bit more creative, because you're like, listen, this is what I have, this is what we can do, this is what we cannot do. So let's try and, use some brain power to figure out how we can, make these shots look as high budget and get the best ROI on the actual footage that we possibly can. So I think obviously building up your skills is a huge asset. And like Kel said, you'll never lose that. You always have those skills. So once you do learn something, you can figure it out. You can use it in other scenes or other movies. But also just knowing like what your limitations are is just big. I think that'll keep you and help you avoid a lot of pitfalls that a lot of indie filmmakers make, as far as just knowing what you're capable of doing. And when you start to push the boundary of, whether or not you can actually do that, you take a step back and you can actually become more creative.
Exactly. And that's really what I'm going to stress for is like, if you really do want to be successful here, you have to be the one leading the charge when it comes to learning and doing all of the hard work and everything there. So, understand your skills, understand where you want to, focus them. We always say that editing is probably the best skill set that you can have because it really gives you a mind to make a movie. So that's really going to be something critical. The next thing I wanted to, address is what's your budget? So really, this is basically how we start a movie from scratch now, as we say, well, we need it to be within this budget range. And let's go ahead and do that. And I think something I see all the time in the indie film community is they're really not very focused when it comes to actually nailing down what this budget is going to look like. And I think that makes things really, really hard, and it makes it really easy for budgets to get out of hand. Because so many times I'll hear things like, I need maybe $50,000 or $100,000. $50,000 to $100,000 is a very wide range. And, just hearing indie filmmakers essentially doubling the range that they might need for their budget instantly to me shows me they have no real grasp of how much these things are going to cost. So I want to talk about budget for two things. One, I want to make sure that people understand just how much this costs. It's incredibly expensive. So we'll kind of go through a little bit more detail in part two. But, I think first things first, people, I would say, underestimate how much their movie's going to cost, the idea that they have in their head. And then they also underestimate how much a day of production is going to cost regardless. So would you say, because again, we had squibs and all of the ideas, a lot of the scripts that we had early on, we just never would okay because we would know that this scene or this idea was impossible to do. And I think early filmmakers and film producers can get caught up with an idea, force themselves to do it, pay a lot of money, and in the end not get a good result from it. So would you want to talk about how most people, I think they underestimate how much their idea is going to cost, and they underestimate how much it just costs to be on set each day?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, new filmmakers who have never worked on a set or have never worked on an indie set specifically, things can spiral out of control very quickly as far as like budget goes. And I think unless you have a line producer that has experience or an accountant that has experience, they could be like, listen, this is how much you have to budget for each day for food. This is how much you have to budget for this shot. This is how much you have to budget for all, all of the other stuff that you want in your film. If you don't have someone who with experience on that, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. To actually feed an entire crew for one day can get very expensive. And, I'd wager that most people underestimate that. They don't think it's that expensive, and it's very difficult to measure how much food you're going to go through. And it's pretty much taken us 11 movies to get to the point where we can budget that properly. So I think food's like a big thing that, costs move around all the time and can get expensive very quickly. Props is another thing. Just buying a whole bunch of small little stuff adds up dramatically. We have very little props in all our movies, but man, you're spending a lot of your budget on just small props that are necessary for the film. And it can be very difficult to actually get that done on, a budget. So I think, unless you have someone who's done these movies before and understands how much to properly budget, you know, you have to try and keep it as low as possible. And then the other thing that a lot of people, mess up is they run out of money when they go to post. They don't realize how expensive post can be. If you have CGI shots in there, it's going to be a fortune. If you're not editing the movie yourself, you might need multiple editors, and they're gonna get to problems, and they're gonna find problems, and that's gonna cost more money because it's gonna take hours and hours to fix. And there's a lot of stuff that, like, we had reflections in the window in Girl in Cabin 13, and I wasn't skilled enough to be able to pull those out properly. And it cost me, a good amount of money to get all that stuff fixed. And it wasn't just money, it was a lot of time. It took like a week for him to get all that stuff done, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but with how quickly we move through our projects, it was. So I think, a lot of people underestimate, and they don't have the money saved up to actually get the movie finished in post, which is why you see a lot of Kickstarters and Indiegogos asking to raise money to finally, polish the movie and get it done. So I say, like, the two big mistakes is just, not understanding variable costs, which is like food and props and stuff that like could spiral out of control quickly, and just not save enough money for post. And I think if this is your first film, I'd either try and find someone who's done some of this stuff before that can give you at least guidance on your script and your breakdown for budgeting, that's worked on indie seps before, that can kind of give you a range or just a template to stick to. And if you don't have access to that, then just try and keep it as low as possible and really try and make sure you're going into post with maybe 20% of your budget, maybe even more, honestly. Depending on how much editing you can accomplish yourself versus how much you're going to have to actually outsource and get an editing team to finish your movie.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is really just understanding that, you're most likely gonna be off on the budget, especially if it's your first time. I think the first thing that anyone should look at doing, in my opinion, is make something for free. Really try and create an idea around something you can do for free with a buddy, with yourself, like whatever it might be, or very, very minimum. We always ask what's the best budget, and we're going to respond with the lowest. I mean, it just period. The only thing you can really control is the budget, and you can't control the revenue element of it before going with distribution and all those different angles. And a lot of times, maybe you're just making something to get experience, which is again a success. If you're just uploading things for feedback, that is a success as a filmmaker. To me, the whole goal here is to get through the process with a product that you can get feedback in, and then still have the will to do it again, not be crushed by just how brutal things can be. And we see it all the time. Someone goes through this entire process, makes their first movie, and then they're just like, well, I'm never going to touch movies again. So I think the best thing you can do to prevent that is really have in your mind that, what's the least I can possibly do this for the budget. And it also goes back to kind of what we were just talking about, where, you want to have the least amount of crew on set because it's just going to go back to the budget. So really, for your budget, understand what it is. I think the worst thing you can do is try and, if you're an indie filmmaker, you shouldn't be touching anything over $20,000, like in the sense of like, even for distribution, in my opinion, if it's your first few movies, unless you have a name brand or something like that, because it's just going to be incredibly tough, especially if you're looking to continue to have momentum, if you need to recoup these costs in like 7 years or so. So I think a lot of people will get focused on an idea, which is going to lead us to the next, tip that we have, which is keep your idea simple. A lot of times people are like, oh, well, here's my idea, and I'm probably gonna need, 100, 200K for this. And to me, it's just, okay, well, sounds like you just need a new idea. So, first thing I want to talk about, what's crazy in this industry is I feel like the amount of time that people get fixated on a specific idea. And I can understand why, we have ideas that we absolutely love and whatnot. But to me, the easiest thing you can do to set yourself up for success is switch your idea to something more simple. So do you want to kind of talk about how we see this in the industry and how really that was the big turning point for us? I mean, we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot with the idea now.
Yeah, I think especially, when I first started out, obviously I have scripts and ideas that, really resonate. These are the stories that I want to tell. The problem is like, you just don't have a budget to tell the stories properly. And so, I'm constantly writing. We pretty much write a script a week. Sometimes it's scripts on, future projects. Sometimes it's scripts that I just write for fun, but I'm always writing. I probably have about 100 different scripts right now, in like our little vault. We'll probably film 2 to 3 more this year. And out of those 100, I probably have maybe 7 or 8 that are actually filmable with our skill level and our budget. So you're looking at maybe 7 to 8% of our scripts are actually filmable. And some of those are just 2.0 versions of movies we've done before. So there's nothing very new. The rest of them are just, they kind of go in tiers where, if I had a little bit more money, or if we had a deal lined up with a larger, streaming service, then I would feel comfortable, upping our budget a little bit to tell this story. But we're just not there yet. And then we obviously have movies that would need the aid of a theatrical release in order to actually get their money back or have a shot of making their money back. So, it's totally fine. I think you can, don't limit yourself with budget. Whenever I write a script, I never have budget in mind for the first couple of drafts. I just write it and, tell the story how I want to tell the story. And then after the second or third draft, I'm like, all right, now let's scale this and try and get to fit within, the budget that we're trying to do. And look, if after two or three drafts, if I can't get the movie to fit in a budget, then I just scrap the idea. I just put it on the back burner and just give it another day. I'm not sitting here, continually rewriting and being like, this is my only idea. This is the one I want to tell. And, trying to just mess with it, because at some point, you're going to start to pull away from the story. You're not going to be able to tell what you want to, tell. And for indie film, makers, you're like, well, how can you make a movie for these, these low budgets? It's just, you got to be more creative. You get, the world that you're going to build is probably one location. So you have one house, you have two or three actors, and it's your job to come up with a story that's engaging, that's entertaining, that can be told within those limitations. And I think a lot of filmmakers are just like, nope, this is my idea. I want to tell it. I don't care if it's a big budget sci-fi movie, or we have to have a spaceship or this crazy fight scene. This is what I want to tell, and I'm not going to compromise on it. And I was like, look, man, you can do that. It's totally fine. But it's just going to be hard for you to finish that movie, to make another movie, and just go back to the whole concept we started, which is just get another rep and learn from your mistakes and just essentially make another movie. You're going to struggle if, the idea that you're coming in is just a very high budget, high technical movie. When you have to honestly just be, honest with yourself as on a technical level as well. And I think having the skills to pull off one of those ideas just as important, if not more important, than actually having the budget.
I completely agree. I mean, and to me, it's always the most shocking thing, because it's like, guys, the idea is the easiest thing to change. Like, why all of this frustration and stuff like that? And I really do want to hammer this home. You are most likely in for a really, really hard time if you're finding yourself fighting over little details, like it needs to be this type of, like, it needs to be a gas station, or it needs to be a diner. It needs to be, none of that stuff really needs to be that. You have all complete control and flexibility in the writing process, and don't have that, backfire on you. So I think realistically, when we speak of simple ideas, I think just a little bit more of clarification on that. Look at a lot of our movies. It's typically a small group contained in one or two locations with one or two supporting characters. It's not locations that would cost money to rent out. It's typically a single location or a place that we already have access to filming. So, look at what you have, look at where you can film, and write an idea around that. But do you want to talk about the minimalistic concept in the sense of limited characters, limited, special effects and everything like that, and just understand it? Because I think the best thing that we have now is the scripts that we get, we know they're filmable by us. And unless you've made a movie, you have no clue. And what I find is the first people that kind of get into it, they do not write movies that they can make.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first step, is just, like I said, you have to know your technical level, your skill level, and you have to know, you have to make a movie that's within your budget range. And, I get a script sent to me all the time, and there's a lot of them are like, yeah, I can make this movie. I'm like, well, what's your budget? And it's like 20, 30K. And I'm like, I read the first 3 pages of the script. I'm like, this is $1 million movie. Like, you will not be able to tell this movie or tell this story without $1 million.
Yep.
And I think it's just a lot of people, it's just lack of experience, but that just goes back to, understanding your skills on a technical level. That's why if you can get input on someone who's done this stuff or done budgeting or line producing on a indie level, just to give you guidance, I think it's worth it. Especially if it's your first couple of films. But I think that, just the amount of characters you have in your movie, when you add a character, usually the actors are our biggest expense on our films. So anytime going from 2 to 4 characters could add 20 to 30% of your budget, or add 20 to 30% onto your actual budget. So just, making sure that if you're going to have 4 or 5 characters, and making sure those extra 2 or 3 characters are, worth it, that they're bringing value to the story. Because if they're not, that's just an easy way to keep costs low, is just have 2 actors, which is why you see in a lot of our movies, it's, friends, or it's, boyfriend, girlfriend. And there's a lot of great movies with only two characters. So I think, you have to just kind of look at it from that way. It's like, all right, look, I can add another character. It's probably going to add 15 to 20% to my budget, because you have to pay them, you have to, add them, or you have to pay them, you have to give them food. And it's just going to make your production that much larger. So you have to keep all that stuff in mind, and just making sure that the decisions that you're making are, beneficial to the story. If that person is not adding anything to the story, if it's not making it a better movie, then I think you got to kind of look at your script that way. And I think a lot of people, when I get a script or I look at a script that someone's about to start shooting, they don't take that stuff into consideration. They're like, look, this story needs 7 kids, 7 actors, and it's not going to be a problem. We could totally get it done. Where you could probably make a lot of cuts on a lot of indie movies and have the director make 2 movies instead of 1. And then once again, like, you're going to get that so much better with 2 movies as opposed to 1. Your chances of success are going to be much higher because now you're diversified. And I think it's just a better business model. I think if you can make more movies as opposed to 1 giant movie, make more movies every single time.
Completely agree. And I think that's really the way you need to be approaching your budget. And that's really the way you got to be doing everything, keeping everything as close as possible if you do want to have the most opportunity. Because again, success, in my opinion, is really being able to get that finished product out there and understand where it's going to leave you once it's out there. So, the last thing I really want to touch about in this episode, we both have our own businesses. We both, I would say, are very hardworking individuals. Expect to work hard in this industry. I think anyone in this industry can expect to work really hard. It's really one of the tougher industries that's out there. There's just a lot of people out there that are passionate about this because, let's be honest, it is an amazing process making a movie, and people are very passionate about it. So there's a lot of people willing to hop in and do things and work. And I would say, you need to expect to have this as a 9 to 5 in the sense of at least working those hours. More so, you're going to be working even more on it. I mean, typically we're at late at night, working on the weekends and those things to kind of do all of this process. And I think the biggest thing that happens that prevents indie filmmakers from really getting there, as we've been kind of, leading to, misconception from the beginning with the mindset, overblowing the budget, not being able to recoup the funds. And then the biggest thing at the end of it, they're going to be burnt out from not having the right expectations. So, one thing I kind of wanted to just get your opinion on is, this is a grind. This is a very, very, very hard grind. And I think people that look at DBS and kind of see where we're at now really can't even fathom just the amount of work that's gone in to just get us to where we're at here. And in a lot of people's, mindset of like, if DBS is a success, if it's looking at for it to be self-sustaining monetary wise, where you can have a full-time job, it's really not there yet. And we've already put a monumental amount of work into it. So you just kind of want to talk about being ready to put in the work.
I mean, you have to. It's absolutely ridiculous how many hours that you devote to this whole process, because once again, we are the driving force behind these movies. So we are going to be the ones that are going to be working the hardest. And I mean, honestly, like on a daily basis, I'm writing 2,500 words. I'm actively working with actors. If we're not setting up a production, so we're not in pre-production, I'm going to be working with distribution companies. So I'm writing 2,500 words. I'm actively working on a production with the actors. So we're going over the scripts, we're going over characters, we're working on performance stuff. If I'm not in pre-production, it's distribution stuff where I'm on the phone talking to these distribution companies, trying to get, the right home for our films. We just did a whole festival circuit, which took a good amount of time. We're always networking and trying different ways to, make revenue off these movies. And then, on top of that, I spend about 8 hours a day editing, and that's just, working on getting the next movie uploaded. We just finished one movie, and then right now, starting tomorrow, I'm really starting to go through the Shapeshifter movie and get that one uploaded. And then, by the time that one's done, I'll have another one ready to go that I need to edit. So to give you, an idea of what we do is, I have a day job that requires pretty much 8 hours a day, to work on that. In any kind of downtime, I'm getting in my words writing. So I'm writing 2,500 words. If I have downtime as far as like taking phone calls or sending emails or, staying up with the actors, doing Zoom calls with the actors or meeting and doing live table reads with the actors, I do that as well. And then it's just, at night, I just edit. And that's just what it takes. I mean, if you're not doing that kind of stuff, you're not going to have your movies out in like in a rhythm and a cadence that'll allow you to get your money back. And I think this is why you see a lot of movies that, take a year or 2 years to finish, is because if you're not doing this every single day, and more on weekends, your movies is going to take a long time for your movie to get done. Especially if you're going and hitting technical issues, it's going to take a long time to get it done. So I mean, yeah, it's just that's like what needs to happen if you want to, make a lot of movies. You want to do 3 or 4 movies a year. That's just the work that you need to have. And I understand that. Everyone understands that now. I probably didn't understand that when I first started. So, you know, the idea that, yeah, you can just write a script, film a movie, and then it kind of gets uploaded and it'll take like just a little bit of time and effort is just completely false. And, the more you can, prepare yourself mentally for this process, I think that the better your odds are that you're actually going to succeed.
I really do agree. And, to give another standpoint, that's just making the movies. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things that people think, oh, I made the movie. Well, I spend about 3 hours a day on live on TikTok throughout the day, just trying to get people to take a look at our stuff. I'm out there on our Discord channel doing a lot of stuff like that too. And these are things that it's not just the film, it's building the brand, it's building the relationships. There's so much stuff. You have to be the full business here if you really want to have that shot of going full time with it. So you are everything. And, it really is something where it is such a huge commitment. And I think one thing that, I would recommend to advise is this a commitment that you can make? Right now I've basically said to myself, okay, this is what we want to do. This is what you want to do. We're incredibly passionate about this. And where we're at in our lives, we have the schedule flexibility for it, in the sense that my weekends are devoted to basically, this, I'm not really looking at having additional things outside of just very basic, like hobby of like weightlifting or doing things here, and like rarely trips anywhere. But the reason for it is because it allows me to devote so much time for this, that for different reasons, whether it's, the jobs that you have, or just the constraints with your partner or family or whatever it might be, you might not have access to the time that's required to get this up and off the ground. And I don't want to say this in a sense of, to be negative. I see it a lot. And the last thing I want is a filmmaker to become frustrated. And I think if you can at least have the mindset from the beginning, what it's going to take, then it should allow you to, be more enjoyable when it comes to the process. So, I would say, I think anyone can be a filmmaker, but I think you have to understand that you really have to devote basically your all to it if you even want a shot. So do you kind of want to talk about, how much it means to you to be a filmmaker? Because here's the biggest thing to me. If this was just a business thing, we would have looked at this industry and been like, well, screw it. Like if this was just a money thing, we would have looked at this and said, this is such a terrible process to even go through to try and recoup and become positive ROI. And there's 100 other businesses we could have started, which are immediately much better to recoup the money. But do you want to talk about, because it's something we want to do, we're never going to stop?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing. I think that where the film industry is right now is honestly, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to start to see really, really good films, because the only people left, the only people that are actually entering this space are doing it because they want to. This is what they want to do. Like Kel said, there's a million other things, a million other ways I could, take my time and put it in something where I could make way more money than doing this stuff. And it'd be much more beneficial for my mental health as well. But I mean, this is what I want to do. So this is what we do. And it's just kind of figuring out, is getting better at it. And it's rewarding when you do see growth. But I think that, yeah, if you're not fully committed, if you're not fully into it, if this is not what you want to do, if you're doing it for the glamour, for the fame, or, just to try and be cool to your friends, you're going to burn out, and it's going to be a very difficult process. And I think that's also another reason why a lot of movies enter the void where, they never get uploaded, because they make the movie because they think it's like it's a prestigious industry. And then, they finally get to the point where they actually have to upload it, and the feedback they're getting from friends and family is not very good. The feedback they're getting review wise isn't very good. The movie doesn't look like they had in their head. And then they're just like, all right, you know what? I tried, I didn't work, and I'm not going to upload it because that's only just going to, give me more bad reviews. And then they just quit. And there's a lot of people with just one movie, and then that's it. They never get it released. I've talked to a lot of actors who, I've worked with a director who's done one movie and they have no history of actually uploading anything. And it sucks for all parties involved, but you have to really want this. If this is what you want, it's such a grind. It's such a mentally and physical grind that, you have to make sure that, filmmaking is really your passion. It's really what you want to do, because I don't think there's very much money, if any money at all, involved in this process, at least in the indie level. And it's just, for the amount of hours that you have to actually work to get these things done, it's just, I mean, you can spend your time doing a million other things that, will probably have a better mental and mental aspect for you to work on, or just put you in a better mental space.
Completely agree. I mean, to me, it's really, I just don't want you guys to set yourself up for disappointment with it. So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I don't want to be doom and gloom here. This is just more so letting people know that. With that being said, I don't think it's easier than ever to become a filmmaker, to be someone that can get a finished product done. I think that's the counter to it being very hard is, do you think DBS films could have existed back in the early 2000s, back in the 1990s, and back in that generation, because of how expensive film equipment is? So while it's tough now, there's also a lower barrier than ever. So do you quickly want to talk about that? Because I mean, look at us. We basically now know how to make movies.
Yeah, it's a definitely interesting paradox, because I get this a lot where they're like, so for people who don't know, the 90s and early 2000s were like the glory days of just making movies, because you had DVDs. So what DVDs used to do is you can make a movie for $1 million, 500,000 for $1 million, and you can go straight to DVD. You didn't need to do a theatrical release. So if you did a theatrical release and you did a low budget movie for $1 million, $5 million, you had a good chance of getting your money back, even because people just went to the theaters. And if, they didn't think you would get your money back on that, you go straight to DVD. Blockbuster was still a thing. Walmart, Target, all these stores would buy millions of dollars of just DVDs because that's what they needed. Like Best Buy. So immediately for $1 million movie, you would get, $5 million just in DVD sales. And then, Netflix was coming up, so you can get a deal with them. So it was very easy to get your money back then. The problem was, like Kel said, you had to work with like film equipment or cameras that, were very, very expensive, and you had to have large production shoots. So I don't think we would have been able to, make a movie at that time. I think it would have been much, much more difficult to raise that capital. And I don't think anyone would have given a chance on an indie filmmaker that was like outside the system, and the system being like traditional filmmaking colleges, like the top 5 filmmaking colleges. Or if you didn't make like a short. This is like why shorts are so, lucrative before, is because, yeah, you can get all this equipment done and you can rent it for a couple of days. You can get a 6-minute short to show that you're a good filmmaker, and then go and use that to raise money. That model is completely dead now, because obviously those deals aren't in place anymore. But at the same time, it's so much easier now, because the cost is so low to make a movie. It's absolutely incredible how the technology has progressed, and you have, everything you need to make a really good movie. And the stuff that you don't need, you have YouTube, which is just an absolute wealth of knowledge. So you have, if you're willing to learn, you have all the resources available to you on the internet, and the equipment's very, very cheap at this time. So to actually make a movie, yes, it's super easy, easiest it's ever been in the whole world. The problem is now there's a lot of competition, and the avenues for actually getting revenue are, completely different. So if you were to say, all right, well, would it be harder to make a movie back then or now? Like which one had a better business model? And I still say now. It's like, listen, I'd rather spend my time and effort actually making things than having to spend all my time and effort trying to raise a ton of money to try and make essentially like one movie. We'd be able to make one movie probably for 2 or 3 years, unless it actually took off. And I'd much rather do what we're doing now, where we have the opportunity to make 3 or 4 movies with less revenue. But at least we're doing something. We're making movies because, once again, this is the passion. This is what we're trying to do, is trying to make movies, for our fans, with our fans. And I'd rather make 3 or 4 movies and not get any money back than make one movie and, have this huge ordeal and process where I'm spending most of my time, raising funds and capital, as opposed to, being behind the camera and directing actors and editing the movie and writing new scripts.
Completely agree. I mean, that really is the double-edged sword that we live in by now. So while it is really, really hard, and it's still by no means the easiest process, but it is something where it's vastly easier when it comes to the wealth side of it and the cost. So, really take advantage of that, take advantage of the resources that are now all available for you, because that is the benefits that we have from this time. The disadvantages is going to be how hard it is to actually get that movie seen. So in our next episode, we're going to hop into a little bit more details on each stage of the process and what we think indie film producers should, look at. Overall, though, guys, I just want you to have the right expectations. I didn't want to come off as any type of negative here, because, again, at the end of the day, it is an amazing process. And more than anything, we want to empower other filmmakers to be able to do what they love, just how we're able to do so too. So until then, have a good one.